While my cousins toasted champagne to celebrate the millions they inherited, I stood quietly at the edge of the room, clutching a wrinkled white envelope with a one-way plane ticket inside. No mansion, no yacht, no penthouse, just a destination: Rome. The laughter that followed still echoes in my mind. It wasn't the sound of grief. It was greed in its most polished form, wearing designer suits and pearl necklaces, sipping vintage wine as they picked through my grandfather's legacy like vultures circling a feast. And I was the forgotten one. The footnote. The history teacher with a rusted-out Honda and a suitcase full of regrets. 6 words would change everything, but no one knew that yet. Let me take you back to that October afternoon. The Rochester Country Club, an elite haven, where my grandfather had once signed million-dollar contracts over brandy and cigars, now held his final legacy in a leather-bound folder clutched by our family attorney. It should have been somber. It should have been sacred, but it felt like a stockholder meeting with funeral flowers. I watched my cousin Preston adjust his Rolex for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He stood at the head of the table, already practicing his future CEO posture. Across from him, Mallory, his sister, flicked through Instagram filters, probably searching for the perfect morning chic aesthetic to post with a crying emoji caption. Vernon and Beatrice. My uncle and aunt stood behind them, practically glowing. You could see it in their eyes. This was their moment, their coronation. They had waited decades for this inheritance to come through, and now the crown was finally being passed. And me? I'd driven 3 hours from Detroit in a car that barely started, wearing a second-hand blazer and carrying only one thing in my inside pocket: the last chess piece my grandfather ever gave me, a black knight. You see, to them, Grandfather Roland was a titan, a self-made mogul who built Whitmore Shipping from a single fishing boat after the war. He was hard, strategic, obsessed with legacy and loyalty. They all believed he'd pass the kingdom down to the one who talked the loudest, dressed the sharpest, played the part best. But they never understood him like I did, because I didn't see Roland Whitmore, the empire builder. I saw the man who showed up every Sunday with a portable chessboard and a challenge. "You only win," he once told me, "when you stop playing the game they expect." I never played to win money. I never asked for favors. I never sat in corporate meetings or networked at country club mixers. I chose chalkboards over boardrooms, textbooks over spreadsheets. I chose meaning. They thought that made me weak. But grandfather, he knew better. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The will was opened like the lid on a treasure chest, except the gold had already been mentally divvied up in their heads. To Vernon and Beatrice, to Preston, to Mallory, each name followed by a property, a position, a possession. Then came mine. The lawyer paused, looked at me. "And to my grandson, Nathan Whitmore," he said, clearing his throat, "I leave this." He pulled out a single envelope yellowing at the corners, my name written in grandfather's handwriting. That room went silent for 2 full seconds. Then Preston laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was cruel, mocking, dismissive. "An envelope? Seriously?" he scoffed. "What's in it? Coupons? A subway token?" Inside was a plane ticket. Rome. One way. Departure in 48 hours. No note, no explanation. Just a destination and a date. I stared at it, confused, embarrassed. My heart was pounding so loud, I could barely hear the rest of the laughter. Mallory recording it on her phone. Vernon smirking. Beatrice offering a fake sweet. That's so thoughtful. A little trip to clear your head. My mother, who'd sat silently in the corner, finally spoke. Is that everything? She asked the lawyer, voice calm but edged like glass. He nodded. There is one final letter, for Nathan, to be opened only upon arrival in Rome. Preston practically howled. A letter? What is this? A scavenger hunt? But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I was staring at the ticket, at the handwritten name, at the black knight in my pocket, at the memory of our last chess game just 2 weeks before he died. That day, Grandfather leaned in and whispered something I hadn't understood until that very moment. The best moves, Nathan, are the ones your opponent never sees coming. And as the rain finally stopped outside the country club, a single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, landing right on my envelope. They all thought I had lost. They had no idea. I'd just been handed the first move. Before that funeral, I believed I understood my family. I thought I knew exactly who they were, what they wanted, and what role I played in their story. I was the outsider, the quiet one, the teacher, the good boy who had chosen chalk dust over stock options. I was wrong, because sitting in that oak-paneled room at the Rochester Country Club, watching my relatives circle each other like predators, I realized I didn't know them at all. Not really. I only knew the masks they wore. Take Preston, for example, my older cousin, the golden boy, the one who had been groomed since childhood to take over Grandfather's empire. He had shadowed Roland Whitmore through every boardroom and factory floor. He'd spent his summers not on beaches, but in shipping yards, learning the language of profit margins, tax shelters, and acquisitions. He wore success like armor. Wharton MBA, custom suits, buzzwords that rolled off his tongue as if he'd swallowed an entire business textbook. Family dinners with him felt like TED Talks no one had asked for. He could turn a simple question, pass the salt, into a mini lecture on supply chains. And yet, behind the polished surface, there was something brittle about Preston, a kind of hunger that never seemed satisfied. He wanted the company, yes, but more than that, he wanted Grandfather's approval. He wanted to be crowned king in front of all of us, proof that his sacrifices had been worth it. Then there was Mallory, his younger sister. She chose a different path, one paved in filters, hashtags, and curated perfection. Her life was a slideshow of European ports, champagne flutes, and designer dresses. 200,000 followers watched her pose on yachts she didn't own, in penthouses she didn't pay for. She called it building her platform. I called it waiting for the real inheritance, waiting for the day she could trade borrowed glamour for actual ownership. Her greatest achievement was a blue check mark and a Swiss banker boyfriend with a vineyard. But even as she posted her authentic moments online, I always sensed a flicker of doubt behind the smile, like she was rehearsing for a role she didn't believe in. And Vernon and Beatrice, my uncle and aunt. They were the power couple, at least in their own minds. Vernon had clawed his way to CFO of Whitmore Shipping, but everyone in the company knew the real work was done by his assistant. Vernon was a man who played at power, a master of looking important while shifting responsibility onto others. Beatrice thrived in ballrooms, not boardrooms. She collected charity galas the way some people collect stamps, not because she cared about the causes, but because she loved seeing her name in the society pages. Their mansion was so sprawling, they needed an intercom system just to find each other. On the surface, They were everything a Whitmore was supposed to be. Wealthy, connected, untouchable. But I'd seen cracks even before that day. The forced smiles, the quiet desperation when the cameras weren't rolling, the way they measured their worth in square footage and photo spreads. And then, there was me, the odd one out, the history teacher from Detroit, the one who drove a car that rattled at stoplights and graded essays at a kitchen table bought at a garage sale. I taught 43 teenagers about revolutions, depressions, and constitutions. I earned a modest paycheck. I came home to a one-bedroom apartment with a ceiling stain shaped like Texas. I wasn't rich, but I had purpose. And for years, I told myself that was enough. My father, Dennis, had understood that choice. He was the only one who ever did. He'd spent his whole life being the reliable brother, the quiet partner, the one who cleaned up Vernon's messes and signed away his own shares to cover his brother's bad investments. He died at his desk at 15 minutes past midnight, still reviewing contracts. Heart attack. I was 15. His last words to me were burned into my memory. "Don't let them turn you into something you're not, Nathan. Your grandfather did that to me. Look where I am." 3 hours later, he was gone. My mother, Grace, picked up the pieces. She was a nurse at Detroit General, working 12-hour shifts to keep us afloat. She never said a bitter word about Vernon, but I saw the look in her eyes at Dad's funeral. A quiet rage, a knowledge that some betrayals don't need to be spoken, to be felt. And then there was grandfather himself, Roland Whitmore, a mystery wrapped in a three-piece suit. He built his shipping empire from nothing, but he never believed in handouts. Every birthday card came with a $20 bill and a note. Make it worth more. Every Christmas gift was a book about business or a certificate for an online accounting course. The only time he seemed genuinely interested in me was during our Sunday chess games. He'd show up with the board already set, and for an hour we would sit in silence, moving pieces, testing each other. "You play like your father," he once said, "too worried about protecting your pieces, not focused enough on winning." "Maybe I don't want to sacrifice everything just to win," I replied. For the first time, he smiled, a real smile. "Maybe that's why you're the only one who still interests me, Nathan." Preston never understood those games. He saw only power moves and profit margins. Mallory didn't see them at all. She was too busy chasing likes. But me? I paid attention. And yet, even I didn't see the full board. I thought I knew where the pieces were. I thought I knew the players. But the real game, the one my grandfather had been setting up for decades, wasn't happening in Detroit or New York or the Hamptons. It was happening on a vineyard in Italy. And my plane ticket was the opening move. Before the envelope, before the ticket, before the laughter that still haunts my memory, there was just me, a high school history teacher with calloused hands from whiteboard markers and a back that ached from too many hours standing. I woke up every weekday at 5:30 a.m. to the same routine. The same cracked ceiling in my apartment, the same distant barking from my neighbor's dog, the same stretch of cold linoleum under my feet. Predictable, modest, mine. I lived in a one-bedroom walk-up in Detroit, the kind of place where your neighbors recognize you by your footsteps in the hall and where the heat rattles through the vents like an old man with a cough. My ceiling had a water stain that, if you stared at it long enough, resembled the state of Texas. That stain had been there for 3 years, outlasting 2 relationships, 4 pay raises, and 1 failed attempt to fix it myself with a patch kit I bought at Home Depot. That was home. Some nights, I'd sit at my kitchen table. A scratched-up piece of oak I bought at a garage sale for $20 grading papers until midnight. I taught U.S. history at Lincoln High, inner-city school, underfunded, underappreciated, but full of kids with potential. Real potential. The kind of students who had already seen more by the age of 16 than most of my family would in a lifetime. Some of them came to school hungry. Others had 2 jobs. I knew their stories, and they knew mine. Not all the details, but enough to know I was there because I chose to be, not because I had nowhere else to go. I had walked away from a family empire, from yachts and stock portfolios and summer homes in Martha's Vineyard, and I hadn't done it out of spite. I did it because I wanted something different, something real. You see, in the Whitmore family, success was measured by how much you could own, how high your ceiling was, how many names you could drop at dinner. But for me, success looked like getting Jasmine to pass her AP history test after failing the first semester. It looked like helping Marco understand what the Emancipation Proclamation actually meant, not just memorize it for the test. It was staying late to listen to Elijah talk about how he wanted to be a lawyer someday, even though everyone else in his life told him he wouldn't make it past 20. I didn't have a company car. I didn't have a tailored suit. But I had purpose, and sometimes that felt like enough. Until it didn't. The truth is, I struggled. Quietly. Always quietly. My rent was $1,100 a month. My paycheck, after taxes and union dues, left just enough for groceries, gas, and the occasional takeout on Fridays. My Cara 04 Honda Civic needed new brakes. Again. I kept putting it off, praying each morning that the squeaking wouldn't turn into grinding. And yet, even with all that, I didn't ask for help. Not from them. Not from Vernon or Preston or anyone else with Whitmore embossed on a business card. Because I remembered what it cost my father, Dennis Whitmore, my dad. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice, never missed a parent-teacher conference, never came home without checking in on my homework first. He worked in grandfather's company for 22 years, a quiet presence behind the scenes, the responsible one, the man who handled the paperwork, smoothed out the crises, covered Vernon's mistakes. He signed over most of his company shares to help his brother avoid bankruptcy after one too many risky investments. Everyone called it a noble sacrifice. I called it betrayal, because 3 months after that, he was gone. Heart attack. At his desk, reviewing contracts he didn't believe in. I was 15. He died before I could even ask him why. The last thing he ever said to me was this: "Nathan, don't let them change you. Your grandfather did it to me. Look where I am." 3 hours later, the phone rang. My mom, Grace, was the one who held everything together after that. She picked up extra shifts at the hospital, 12-hour nights in the ER, with barely enough time to sleep before doing it all again. She sold her wedding ring to cover my tuition application fees. I found it in a pawn shop years later, still tucked in the same velvet box. I never bought it back. It didn't feel right, like taking something sacred from a grave. She never spoke a bitter word about the Whitmores. Not once, but I saw it in her eyes every time Vernon walked into a room. A quiet storm she refused to unleash. Some wounds aren't loud. Some are stitched with silence. So yes, I made my choice. I chose chalkboards over conference rooms, teenagers over tycoons, truth over title. And for a long time, I believed I'd made peace with that the best moves in life were quiet ones, But that was before the funeral, before the envelope, before a one-way ticket to Rome made me question everything I thought I knew. Because, as it turns out, even the most predictable life can be built on buried secrets. And sometimes, the board you think you're playing on is just the decoy. The rain outside the Rochester Country Club hadn't stopped since morning. It clung to the windows in thin streaks, muting the world beyond the glass, as if even the weather sensed what was about to happen. Inside the oak-paneled boardroom, the air was thick with perfume, cologne, and anticipation. Grandfather had requested no, demanded that his will be read here. The same room where he'd negotiated his largest shipping contracts, where the smell of cigars still lingered faintly in the curtains. For my family, this wasn't just a funeral. This was a coronation. I sat near the end of the massive mahogany table, my palms pressed flat against the cool surface. Across from me, reflected in its polished sheen, I could see their faces, each one a mask of grief stretched over hunger. Mr. Harwick, the family attorney, cleared his throat. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who'd been in grandfather's service for decades. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the leather-bound folder. "Before we begin," he said, "I want you all to know, Mr. Roland Whitmore personally reviewed these arrangements 1 week before his passing." Vernon leaned forward, fists pressing against the table. "We understand, Harwick." Roland and I discussed the succession plan extensively. A lie. Everyone knew grandfather never discussed business outside the office. But Vernon had been telling anyone who would listen that he was next in line, that Preston would be his right hand, and the family legacy secured. "Let's proceed," Harwick said. The room fell silent. "To my eldest son, Vernon Whitmore, and his wife Beatrice," Harwick read, "I leave the estate in the Hamptons and the investment portfolio contained in account ending 471. Beatrice's diamond bracelet caught the light as she grabbed Vernon's arm. "The Hamptons house," she whispered, voice quivering with excitement. "Oh, Vernon." He did remember how much we loved it there. Vernon sat back, satisfied. A king claiming his castle. Harwick turned the page. "To my grandson, Preston Whitmore, I leave Whitmore Shipping Industries and all its operational assets, with the condition that he maintains current employment levels for at least 1 year." Preston's chair scraped loudly as he shot to his feet. "I knew it," he said, his voice cracking with triumph. "Grandfather, I won't let you down." He was already pulling out his phone, probably to update his LinkedIn profile to CEO before the ink dried on the will. Harwick didn't pause. "To my granddaughter, Mallory Whitmore, I leave the Manhattan penthouse on Central Park West and the yacht Serenity, currently moored in Newport." Mallory let out a squeal so high it might have shattered crystal. "The penthouse? Oh my God, do you know what that's worth? And the yacht? My followers are going to die." She was already picturing her next post. Then Harwick's eyes shifted to me. "And to my grandson, Nathan Whitmore." He hesitated. For the first time, his voice softened. "I leave this." He reached into the folder and pulled out a small white envelope, the edges worn, my name written in grandfather's shaky handwriting. The room went still. 2 seconds of silence, then laughter. Preston's laugh was the loudest, echoing off the paneled walls. "Are you serious? An envelope?" Mallory pulled out her phone, grinning. "This is actually hilarious." "Nathan, your face right now." I took the envelope with steady hands, though my heart pounded against my ribs. The paper felt thin, almost weightless, yet heavier than anything I'd ever held. Inside was a single plane ticket. Rome. One way. Departure in 48 hours. No note, no explanation. Just a destination and a date. Preston snatched the ticket from my hand before I could stop him. Let me guess. A coach ticket. Oh, this is rich. The teacher gets a vacation. Mallory giggled. Maybe he left you some frequent flyer miles, too. Vernon stood, straightening his tie with the authority of a man who believed he had won everything. Roland always said you lacked the killer instinct for business, Nathan. At least he gave you something nice. Rome is lovely this time of year. That's probably his way of saying goodbye, Beatrice added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. A little trip to help you process everything. How thoughtful, my mother silent, until now spoke up. Is that everything, Mr. Harwick? Her tone was cool, but sharp enough to cut glass. That concludes the distribution of assets, Harwick replied, closing the folder. There is, however, a personal letter for Nathan to be opened only upon his arrival in Rome. Preston practically howled. A letter? What's he going to say? Sorry you're poor. Enjoy the pizza. Preston, enough, Vernon said, though he was smiling. Nathan chose his path. He wanted to be a teacher, and Roland respected that enough to give him a parting gift. We should all be grateful for what we've received. But I wasn't listening to them anymore. I was staring at the ticket. October 15th. Flight Alitalia 61. Arrival time 3 p.m. Why so specific? Why Rome? Grandfather had never mentioned Italy in all our years of chess games. Shanghai, London, Hamburg, yes, but never Rome. I slid the ticket back into the envelope, stood, and met each of their eyes. Your grandfather gave me a ticket, I said quietly. The least I can do is use it. You're actually going? Mallory blinked, surprised. You're going to use your sick days to take a random trip to Rome? Vernon shook his head. Sentimental fool, just like your father. Dennis never understood that emotion has no place in business either. And that's when I knew. I was definitely getting on that plane. Because Vernon was wrong about my father. Wrong about me. And maybe, just maybe wrong about what grandfather had really left me. The ticket weighed nothing in my pocket, but somehow it felt heavier than all the millions they'd just inherited. As I walked out of that country club, their laughter following me to the parking lot, I remembered grandfather's last words during our final chess game. The best moves, Nathan, are the ones your opponent never sees coming. The rain had stopped, and for the first time that day, the sun broke through the clouds. That night, back in my apartment, the ticket sat on the kitchen table like it had weight more than just paper and ink. More than a flight, more than a destination. It felt like a question waiting for an answer, one I wasn't sure I had the courage to face. I stared at it for over an hour, didn't touch it, didn't move, just stared. Rome. One way. October 15th, 3 p.m. It wasn't just the timing that got to me. It was the silence surrounding it. No letter, no message, no goodbye. It was unlike grandfather to be vague. He had never done anything without precision. He'd lived his life like a chess match, 3 moves ahead of everyone else. So why Rome? Why me? My laptop screen glowed in the dark beside me, the tab still open to my online banking. Balance, $1,847.23. Rent was due in 5 days. My car still needed brake pads. I had 43 essays on the Civil War to grade, and a substitute teacher to find. Every logical part of my brain screamed, that flying to Rome on a whim was irresponsible, even reckless. But logic had never felt so small, so quiet. Because I couldn't stop thinking about our last chess game 2 weeks before the funeral. That Sunday, Grandfather had been different, softer somehow. He'd made tea himself, not his usual scotch or brandy. He wore an old wool sweater I'd never seen before, and instead of his usual silence, he talked. "Nathan," he'd said, moving his knight in a strange, looping pattern. "What do you know about trust?" I didn't even hesitate. "It's earned, not given." He smiled, a tired kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, boy. Real trust is knowing when to follow even if you don't understand the why. Your father knew that. He trusted me with something once, something precious, and I failed him. I'd sat still, afraid to ask more. But you, Nathan," he continued, "you're different. You don't want anything from me." "I never have," I said. "I know. That's why, when the time comes, you'll trust me, even if everyone else thinks you're a fool." At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental, a rare crack in his emotional armor. Now, it felt like a warning, a message left inside a maze. I picked up the ticket again, turning it over in my hands. That's when I noticed it. A small number written in faint pencil at the bottom corner of the envelope. 1947. It was barely visible, a smudge at first glance. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I blinked. 1947? The year Grandfather would have been, 22? The year after he left the Navy. The year he supposedly started his business with one boat and a dream. The same year he'd always glossed over in his stories. Why would that number be here? Why now? Why hide it? My mind raced through memories, history, family photos. Nothing specific ever came up about 1947. It was always the war, then the business. Nothing in between. And yet, this number, this date, it wasn't random. I grabbed my phone and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. "Nathan? I think I'm going," I said, no hesitation. "To Rome. I think I have to—" A pause. Then softly, "I knew you would." "What?" "Your grandfather called me last month. He didn't say much, just that I should support whatever decision you made after the funeral." My chest tightened. "Mom, this is insane. I can't afford to miss work. I can't afford a hotel. I don't even know what I'm going for." She was quiet for a beat. "Your father once told me Roland wasn't always the man we knew. He said there was a before and after in his father's life, and we only knew the after." Before and after. The words stuck with me. The next morning, I went to Lincoln High and arranged for a substitute teacher. My principal, Dr. Washington, was less than thrilled. "3 days off? Mr. Whitmore, you've never taken a sick day in 6 years." I nodded. "That's why I'm cashing a few in." She sighed, but approved it. As I walked the halls one last time before the trip, Jasmine, one of my brightest students, caught up to me. "You okay, Mr. Whitmore? You seem different today." I smiled. "Just thinking about history, Jasmine. How sometimes the most important moments don't feel important at all when they're happening." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like something you'd put on the board." "Maybe I will," I said, and kept walking. I packed light, 1 carry-on, 2 changes of clothes, my father's old leather journal, the one he'd given me the summer before he died. The Uber to the airport cost $32 I didn't really have, but it didn't matter. I was already too far gone, too deep into something I couldn't explain. At the gate, while waiting to board, I pulled out the envelope again and stared at the number in the corner. A year grandfather never spoke about. A year that was about to become the key to everything. I didn't know what was waiting for me in Rome, but I knew one thing for sure. The game wasn't over. Not yet. The wheels touched down at Fiumicino Airport at exactly 3:07 p.m. local time. Grandfather had timed it to the minute. As the plane rumbled down the tarmac, I pressed my forehead against the tiny window, watching the unfamiliar city come into view. Ancient rooftops, distant ruins, cars moving like ants through cobbled streets. Rome. I had arrived. My legs were stiff. My back ached. I had barely slept during the 8-hour flight, squeezed between a snoring businessman and a woman watching a movie on her iPad, without headphones. I hadn't said a word the entire flight. I couldn't. My mind had been spinning the whole time. What was I doing here? Why me? And what secret had my grandfather buried across the ocean? The Italian announcements over the intercom blurred together with the English. Passengers unbuckled, phones lit up, bags rustled down from overhead compartments. I walked through the terminal in a fog, holding my single carry-on, the envelope tucked into my coat pocket, like it was something sacred. My passport was stamped without question. "Purpose of visit?" the immigration officer asked in slightly accented English. I hesitated. "I honestly don't know," I replied. He raised an eyebrow, but stamped it anyway. "Welcome to Italy." I followed the crowd to baggage claim, even though I had no bags to claim. The arrivals hall was a chaos of sound and movement, families reuniting, drivers holding signs, tourists staring at maps like they were in a foreign film. I almost walked straight past it, but then I saw it. A clean black placard held in two gloved hands. Nathan Whitmore. I froze. For a second I thought maybe it was a mistake, but the man holding it made eye contact and gave a polite nod. "Mr. Whitmore?" he asked, accent unmistakably Italian. I stepped forward cautiously. "I'm Nathan." He exhaled with relief. "Finally. Please come quickly. We have a long drive. Who sent you?" He looked me in the eye. "Your grandfather. He arranged everything. Months ago, his name was Lorenzo. He wore a crisp black suit, a dark wool coat, and spoke with the kind of calm confidence that made you trust him immediately. He took my bag before I could argue, led me to a black Mercedes sedan parked just outside the terminal. It looked like it had never seen a scratch or a parking ticket. The kind of car that glided instead of drove. The moment I sank into the leather seat, I felt my muscles relax. The city slipped past the windows as we pulled away, into traffic, then onto a highway heading north. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Montouri Estate," he said, 1 hour north, in the Sabine Hills. "I don't understand. My grandfather never mentioned an estate in Italy." Lorenzo's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. Mr. Rowland owned the estate for 45 years. He visited every September. Always alone 45 years. That meant since 1980. Since before my dad died. Since I was a toddler. Since long before I ever played my first game of chess. How could he have kept something like this a secret? What else had he kept hidden? We left the city behind. The landscape transformed into rolling hills, dotted with olive trees and vineyards that stretched into the horizon. The colors were softer here, sun-washed yellows, greens that looked like they belonged in paintings, not real life. Lorenzo drove like a man born to do it. Swift, confident, unbothered by curves that would terrify anyone else. I held on to the door handle more than once, but somehow it added to the sense of unreality. I wasn't just in a different country. I was in a different story. A chapter I hadn't even known existed. "How long have you known my grandfather?" I asked. "My father was his driver first." "For 25 years. When he passed, I took over. 20 years now. Mr. Roland was very private, but very kind. Did he ever talk about us? About his family in the States?" Lorenzo nodded slowly. "He spoke of you. Often that hit me harder than I expected." "What did he say?" He shrugged gently. "That you reminded him of someone. Someone he once was." We passed through a sleepy village where old men played cards outside a cafe, eyeing us as we drove by. Then we turned down a private road lined with cypress trees, so tall they formed a tunnel overhead. At the end of the road, tall iron gates opened on their own. And there it was, the Monterey estate. It didn't look like wealth the way Americans think of it. There were no gold gates, no marble statues, no helipad or infinity pool. Just a beautiful weathered villa made of honey-colored stone, surrounded by terraced vineyards that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was stunning, quietly, undeniably stunning. Lorenzo parked near the main entrance and got out without a word. I sat there for a moment, heart racing, trying to understand how this place could exist, how he could have built this life, separate from all of us. And then the doors opened. A woman stepped out. Older, elegant. Silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She walked slowly, eyes brimming with tears she made no effort to hide. Lorenzo stood beside me and spoke gently. "Nathan," he said, "meet your grandmother, Sophia Whitmore." For a long moment I just stood there, frozen. This couldn't be real. My grandmother had died before I was born. That's what they always told me. That's what the family said, what the obituaries said, what I believed. But the woman standing in front of me, her face, those eyes, they looked familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. Steel gray, just like grandfather's. Sophia took a step forward. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her posture remained regal, composed in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with grace. "You have his eyes," she whispered, "but your father's spirit." I didn't move. I didn't speak. My hands were shaking. "This is impossible," I finally said. "My grandmother, my American grandmother, her name was Carol. She died before I was born." Sophia nodded gently, taking my hands in hers. "Yes, Carol passed away many years ago. She was your grandfather's wife in America. But I am his wife, in truth." Her accent was soft, musical, the kind of Italian you only hear in old films and lullabies. "I am your real grandmother, Nathan." She led me inside the villa, like she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. The interior was breathtaking in its quiet, beauty stone floors, hand-carved wooden beams, walls lined with photographs, and old oil paintings. But it wasn't ostentatious. It wasn't grand in the way Whitmore money in the U.S. had always tried to be. It was rooted, lived in, loved. Sophia guided me to a sitting room. The walls were filled with framed black and white photos, weddings, vineyards, sunlit courtyards. I stopped in front of one, a younger version of grandfather, laughing in front of a small church, standing beside Sophia in a simple white dress. They couldn't have been older than 22. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Is this—" "Our wedding day," she said. "Rome, 1947. The year, the number on the envelope. It wasn't just a clue, it was the beginning." Sophia poured 2 glasses of deep red wine from a crystal decanter, her hands steady even as mine trembled. "This wine," she said, handing me a glass, "comes from our vineyard. We call it Heredità, It means inheritance. I took a sip. It was rich, smooth, unlike anything I'd ever tasted. I don't understand, I said. Why would he keep this secret? From everyone? Sophia sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. Because Roland was a man torn between two truths, she said, and he didn't know how to live with both. She looked out the window, her gaze drifting toward the endless rows of vines. We met after the war, she said. He stayed in Rome to help with reconstruction. I was a school teacher. He came to one of my classes to donate supplies. That's how it started. Her voice softened. He was kind, wounded in a way he tried to hide, but so full of dreams. We married quickly, built this estate together from nothing, bought a few acres of abandoned vines from an old friend. She smiled. We were poor, but happy. We had a son, Augusto, your father's half-brother. My head spun. A half-uncle? A vineyard? A whole life no one ever spoke about? What happened? I asked. Why leave? She hesitated. The Korean War broke out. Roland felt duty-bound to return. He promised to come back in 6 months, but while on leave, he met Carol. She was pregnant with Vernon before Roland ever had a chance to tell me. I leaned back, stunned. He didn't divorce you? Sophia shook her head. No, he tried, many times, but every time he changed his mind. He couldn't bear to lose either life. He chose to split them, to become two men, the businessman in America, the vintner in Italy. I swallowed hard. He lived a lie. She met my eyes. No, Nathan. He lived two truths. He loved us both, in different ways. He just couldn't choose. She stood and walked to a carved wooden desk in the corner of the room. From it, she pulled out a thick folder and handed it to me. Whitmore Vineyards International, the cover read. Inside were deeds, contracts, bank records, distribution agreements across Europe. Roland left this to you, she said. Not Vernon, not Preston. You. He was very specific. I turned page after page. It was all real, the estate, the land, the business, and it was worth 47 million euros, Sophia said, as if reading my mind, not counting the property. My breath caught. He didn't just leave me a vineyard. He left me an empire, built in silence, hidden from the very people who believed they were entitled to everything. And somehow, he'd chosen me, not the CEO, not the influencer, not the ones who bore his last name like a trophy. Me, the history teacher, the chess partner, the quiet one, the only one who never asked. As the sun set outside, bathing the vineyard in gold, Sophia brought out an old laptop. There's one more thing, she said. He left you a message. A video. You should see it. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, Roland Whitmore. Not the man from boardrooms and bank statements, but the man who once whispered, "Trust me, even when everyone else thinks you're a fool." He looked into the camera and said, "Nathan, if you're watching this, then you trusted me." The screen flickered for a moment, and then his face appeared. Older, paler than I remembered, but clear, composed, calm. Roland Whitmore. My grandfather looked straight into the camera with that same piercing gaze he used to give me across the chessboard. The one that said, "I know what move you're going to make before you do." Behind him, the villa's stone wall bathed in afternoon light. He wasn't in a boardroom. He wasn't behind a desk. He was in Italy. He was home. "If you're watching this," he said, "then you trusted me enough to get on that plane." Good. You were always the only one who understood that sometimes the most important moves don't look like moves at all. He leaned forward slightly. His tone was casual, but underneath it, something coiled. Your cousins by now believe they've won. Vernon has the estate. Preston has the company. Mallory has the penthouse and the yacht. They think they've inherited an empire. He paused, then chuckled softly. Appearances can be deceiving. I leaned in. My heart beat faster with every word. Whitmore Shipping, he continued, has been hemorrhaging money for the past 3 years. Market shifts, bad leadership, internal corruption. I covered the gaps as long as I could, but the truth is, the business is failing. I buried the losses deep. Preston will find them. Eventually, he didn't sound bitter, just tired, honest. The penthouse? Mortgaged 3 times over. The yacht? Leased, not owned. The Hamptons estate? The bank owns 70% of it. I gave them exactly what they showed me they valued: image. Things that sparkle from far away but rot when you look closely. I could almost hear Preston's laughter from the will reading, his arrogance, his need to prove himself. Grandfather had given them what they thought they wanted, and saved the truth for me. But you, Nathan, Grandfather said, you never asked for anything. You never schemed. You never smiled at me hoping for a payout. You chose chalkboards over boardrooms, purpose over power. He sat back in the chair and folded his hands. I played chess with you because I saw what your father had once been before I ruined him. Dennis was like you once, quiet, thoughtful, honest, but I pressured him, pushed him, tried to make him more like Vernon, and in doing so, I broke him. His eyes looked away for a moment. He trusted me once with something that mattered, and I failed him. He looked back at the camera, stronger now, firmer. I don't want to fail you. There was a pause, and then, with that signature Whitmore precision, he laid it out. The Montury estate, the vineyard, the distribution contracts across Europe, the land that Sophia and I bought together. It's all yours, not just because it's worth millions, but because it's real. It grows, it gives, it lasts. I swallowed hard. Sophia said nothing beside me, just watched, eyes glistening. You'll meet your uncle, Augusto. My son, a better man than I ever was. He's kept the business alive for 2 decades, quietly, honorably. He deserves a partner who values legacy over lifestyle. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not just money, not just land, a family, an honest, working legacy. Grandfather leaned closer to the camera again. Preston will call within a month. The numbers won't lie forever. He'll panic. He'll beg. And when he does, remember this: be kinder to him than he was to you. He paused. That familiar sharpness returned to his eyes. That's what makes you better. His mouth curled into a faint smile. Checkmate, my boy. The screen went black. I sat in silence, the only sound in the room the ticking of an antique clock on the wall. For the first time, I understood, not just the strategy, but the heart behind it. He hadn't just disinherited them. He had orchestrated their downfall, and my rise like a final game of chess he'd spent years planning. He gave them shadows. He gave me substance. And he knew the only way I would accept any of it was if it came wrapped in mystery and trust. Sophia placed a hand on my shoulder. He spoke of you often, she said. Every visit, he told stories. The grandson who chose meaning over money. He wanted to believe someone could still carry this forward the right way. My throat tightened. He said you were the only one who still made him feel hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the vineyard paths under moonlight. The rows of vines rustled in the breeze, as if whispering secrets of the past. I thought about my father, about what he might have said if he were standing here. Maybe nothing. Maybe he'd just smile, place a hand on my back, and whisper, "He got it right this time." I returned to Detroit 3 weeks later, jet-lagged, changed, but grounded in a way I hadn't felt in years. The halls of Lincoln High smelled the same old textbooks, cafeteria pizza, teenage chaos. The students greeted me with a mix of curiosity and sarcasm. Mr. Whitmore was back, apparently from Rome or something, and Jasmine swore I was now secretly in the mafia. But behind the jokes, I felt something else. Comfort. It was strange how life could be split in two. The quiet teacher with the stained ceiling and $1,800 in his bank account. And the heir to a 47 million euro vineyard nestled in the hills of Italy. Both were me, and I was still figuring out how to live as both. The call came late one night, midnight. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, the glow of the screen slicing through the dark. Preston. I stared at the name for a long second before answering. "Hello?" A pause, then a voice I barely recognized. "Nathan, we need to talk." Gone was the smugness, the arrogance, the manufactured confidence that had wrapped his every word since we were kids. What remained was raw, unfiltered panic. "The company, it's gone." I sat up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, bankrupt, imploding. The accountants found everything, offshore debt, cooked books, hidden losses. Grandfather covered up so much. I didn't even see it coming. I didn't say anything." "I thought I was taking over an empire," he continued. "Turns out I inherited a sinking ship." Another pause. "Mallory's penthouse was foreclosed yesterday. Dad had to sell the Hamptons estate just to cover legal fees. The yacht? Repossessed. It's all gone." I exhaled. It had happened, just as grandfather predicted. Checkmate. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "No, you're not," Preston replied quietly. "And you shouldn't be. We were horrible to you, mocked you, laughed at you like you were nothing. But you were the only one who actually loved him, not his money. Him." Another long silence. "Grandfather left you something real, didn't he?" "Yes," I said. "Good. You deserve it." The next day I made him an offer. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't pity, it was opportunity. I asked him to help manage the U.S. distribution for Eredita Wines Sophia's label. My label now. A salary, not ownership. He said yes without hesitation. I could still hear the shame in his voice when he came into the office for the first time. Dressed simply. No Rolex, no entourage. Just a man who had been humbled and was trying to rebuild. Mallory took longer. She ghosted me for a few weeks, too proud, too furious, too hurt. But eventually, she called. And when she did, she was different too. "I'm in Rome," she said. "Lorenzo's son Antonio offered me a job in marketing. I figured, if I'm going to sell something, it should be real this time." She laughed softly. "Guess I'm trading selfies for spreadsheets." I smiled. Welcome to the other side. Vernon and Beatrice didn't call. They moved to a small apartment in New Jersey. Vernon found work as a bookkeeper. Beatrice took a job at Nordstrom, folding sweaters and greeting customers with a name tag pinned to her cardigan. They didn't send a message, didn't apologize, didn't explain. And that was fine. Some endings don't need closure. But Preston told me quietly that for the first time in years, they were talking again, eating dinner together, learning how to live without assistants, housekeepers, and designer distractions. Maybe that was grandfather's final lesson to them. Strip away everything and see what's left. My mother cried when I handed her the deed. A guest house nestled on a vineyard in California. Paid in full with my first distribution payment. She retired from nursing the next day. Now she paints, watercolors, landscapes, abstracts. The first one she gave me was of a chessboard under a vineyard sky. She titled it, "The Longest Game." As for me, I still teach, not full-time, just 2 classes a week. U.S. history and a new elective I created, legacy and leadership. The students think it's just another senior blow-off class, until I start talking about trust, about truth, about what it means to inherit something real. Every summer, I return to Italy. Augusto, my uncle, my father's half-brother, runs the operations like a seasoned general. His hands are always stained with earth and wine, and when he laughs, it sounds like my dad. Marco and Elena, my Italian cousins, treat me like I've always belonged. We drink wine under the stars and argue about politics and soccer, and who's making the best risotto that week. They never treated me like a savior. Just family. Last week, Augusto and I played chess in the garden. He's good. Better than I expected. He moved his bishop across the board, paused, and said, "You know, your grandfather always said the winner isn't the one who takes the most pieces." I looked up, but the one who knows which pieces really matter. I stared at the board, then out at the vineyards, then at the portrait of Roland on the wall behind us, young, smiling, standing beside Sophia in 1947. He didn't win by taking everything. He won by choosing the right piece to trust with the end game, and for the first time, I understood. I still have the envelope, crumpled, faded, the ink on my name almost worn away by time and fingers and questions. Inside, the ticket to Rome is still folded neatly, no longer a mystery, but a memory, the beginning of everything. It sits on a bookshelf in my Detroit apartment, between a copy of The Prince and a high school yearbook I can't seem to throw away. Next to it is a bottle of Heredità, 2024, the last vintage my grandfather oversaw before he passed. The label reads, "For Nathan, who understood that the best inheritance isn't what you're given, but what you're trusted to continue." Every Sunday I still play chess, sometimes with Uncle Augusto in the vineyard courtyard, the sun painting gold across the table. Sometimes with my students, who try to beat me with speed instead of patience. And sometimes alone, just me and the board, pieces worn from decades of memory, thinking of the man who taught me how to see past the obvious. I think about that often, how my grandfather, the man who terrified boardrooms and silenced auditors with a single look, spent his final years planning a game not about money, but about meaning. How he let the people who worshipped wealth inherit the illusion of it. And how he gave the only real thing he had left to me. I used to believe legacy was measured in dollars, in stocks and holdings, in properties listed on spreadsheets and net worth calculators. But now, I know better. Legacy is found in the quiet things, the things that can't be counted. It's in the sound of the vines rustling in the Sabine Hills. It's in the laughter of family who never knew your name but welcome you like you've always belonged. It's in the handwritten label on a wine bottle and the dust on a chessboard and the way your mother smiles when she sees you living a life your father never got to. The Whitmore name used to feel like a burden. Now, it feels like a bridge between who I was and who I chose to become. Between two families, between two legacies. And I realize now maybe the most important inheritance is the permission to rewrite the story. To say, this is where it changes. I don't live in a penthouse. I don't own a yacht. My apartment still has the Texas-shaped water stain on the ceiling. But I have something better. I have roots. I have truth. I have the ability to give, not because I have more, but because I finally understand what matters more. Sometimes I visit the vineyard in the off-season, when the tourists are gone and the hills are quiet. I sit under the old cypress tree near the main house, the one grandfather planted the year he and Sophia bought the land. And I ask myself what he would say if he were here now. Would he smile? Would he critique my distribution strategies? Would he still think I'm too cautious on the board? Maybe, but I think he'd be proud. Not because I became rich, but because I didn't have to. Grandfather always said power was never about what you have. It's about what you're willing to lose in order to gain something greater. He sacrificed his queen once, just to teach me that. And now, sitting where he once sat, watching a legacy built on soil and sweat and trust, I finally understand what he meant. This isn't a story about revenge or redemption or even inheritance. It's a story about choice, about choosing purpose over performance, family over fortune, truth over tradition, and about the courage it takes to trust someone long after they're gone. I tell my students that history isn't just names and dates. It's stories, it's patterns, it's cause and effect. And sometimes, the most important moments, the ones that change everything, start with something small. An envelope, a plane ticket, 6 words whispered over a chessboard. The best moves are never seen coming. If this story found you at the right time, maybe it's because you're playing a game of your own. Maybe you're standing at the edge of something that looks small, but holds something enormous. Maybe, like me, you're about to realize that what you thought was the end was just your first move. So hold on to the small things, the quiet things, the things no one else notices. Because sometimes, the smallest gifts carry the biggest surprises.